Hi everybody, my name is Sean O'Kane with Chip Estimate TV, your IP resource in the world of the EDA industry. Today our guest is Kalar Rajendiran, a Senior Director of Marketing with eSilicon. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Sean. Glad to be here.
Yeah, let me get right to it. You know, there's a lot of industry talk about people, designers settling, companies settling for good enough. This is solutions and products, and to get products to market faster. So what does that mean, and how do you respond to that terminology that you hear?
That's correct, Sean. So there's a lot of talk in the industry about good enough solution. It's actually a good soundbite if you think about it. But more importantly, why is that being talked about nowadays? If you really look at it, product cycles have become shorter and shorter nowadays. And so what is happening is people are trying to compete with their competitors and say, okay, how do I get to market faster? And maybe a way to do it is good enough solution will help you, kind of beat your competitors to get the product out faster. But also it could help you, come up with a better solution, maybe a cheaper solution, right? But people are actually forgetting one important point, which is risk reduction, right? So if you really think about successful product introduction, there are actually three components. Mm-hmm. One is risk reduction, which is kind of a given, but not many people think about it. They're always thinking about low-cost solution and getting to market faster. But if you really actually don't pay attention to the risk reduction, you could actually lose the entire market space. If you actually look at examples, I like always use examples to make a point, and I like to use examples in the consumer market because people can actually relate to it. If any of us remember, back, 10, 15, 13 years ago, Intel actually had a big issue with their Pentium processor, with the floating point issue, right? They did not really look at their customer base. They thought, well, maybe, just 1 in a million, 1 in a 5 million operations, this problem will come up. They introduced the market, and reality is that they ended up actually paying dearly. They had to pay actually billions of dollars to fix the problem.
It was a major recall. Oh, so I remember that.
That's an example of not knowing the market. So when people really say good enough, it really means, is this actually meeting my customers' requirements? Not over design, not under design, but optimally designing, and that's exactly the point. That's at least my view.
Mm-hmm. So you have tell us about semiconductor VCP and how does tell us what that is in the context of eSilicon, and how is VCP a better alternative?
Yeah, absolutely. So semiconductor VCP, or value chain producer, is VCP is an acronym for value chain producer, is actually a term that eSilicon coined quite a few years ago, but the model itself is not something new. Back in 2000, when eSilicon was launched as a company, we started talking about this model, and the company was built under that model. The reality is that 10 years fast forward to 2010, all companies pretty much are kind of converging towards that model. And what it is essentially is a collaborative model, which the value chain producer collaborates with the partners and the customers, everybody in the value chain or the supply chain, to provide an optimal solution that I talked about earlier. Not over design, not under design, but really providing the optimal solution and still addressing the reduce the risk, low cost, and also time to market. So these are the three main things that all customers want and the industry needs, and value chain producer helps provide the optimal solution. So essentially a collaborative model, finding the optimal solution, whether it is certain components, providing services, IP, wafer, all the components in the supply chain, bringing it together and looking at it from the customer's perspective. What is important for the customer to get the product out on time in a reduced risk fashion at the lowest cost?
So those are the important aspects customers should consider when choosing and selecting a VCP.
That is correct. Yeah. And of course, not all VCPs are identical. So that kind of begs the question, okay, so you're saying that VCP, of course, if there is only one player out in the market, there's no industry or there's no market, right? There are many players actually who have followed in eSilicon's footsteps to follow the VCP model. So there are many people in there. So you ask, well, how do you as a customer choose the right VCP for your product? And if you really look at it, what are the important things? Again, going back to reduce the risk, low cost, and time to market. I'll use examples, right? One thing that is important for a customer is getting the right piece of IP, and I'll use an example. Let's take the communication space for that matter, right? If you are a customer making, say, a network processor unit, you have to look at what your chip is going to be talking to on either ends of the input and output. If you have a framer or a Mac chip on the other side, and on the other side you may actually have a switch fabric, you have to look at, okay, what are those chips using, and make sure that you try to do your best in your design, the interface design, to design some intercompatibility and interoperability part. What this means is that picking the right IP. Now, if you go to a traditional ASIC supplier, they're going to try to push their own IP because that's their vested interest to use their IP. You go to a value chain producer, they can pick the right IP from among the supply chain partners and really use the optimal IP for your chip. Now, it goes even further. What if there's a key piece of IP that is missing? And there are certain VCPs who don't have the ability to provide that niche, important piece of IP, and so you have to really look at the VCP who can provide that niche IP as well. So it's not just going and buying from supply chain, but you also have to have an added value, and so that's an aspect that you ought to look at.
And you can access the eSilicon IP catalog on ChipEstimate.com. Also, you can view this interview on ChipEstimate.com in our featured videos section. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Kalar. And we'll see you next time on Chip Estimate TV.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.